The summer that everything fell apart started with the attic. My wife Claire and I had just moved into the house that spring, a narrow two-story place outside Columbus with a sagging porch and a backyard that looked bigger in the photos than it actually was. It wasn't fancy, but it felt like the kind of house people grew into, the kind where you pictured birthday parties in the kitchen and a dog running through the grass. Claire loved it immediately. I liked that she loved it. The attic was the only part we hadn't really dealt with yet. It was one of those steep ladder pull-down situations in the hallway ceiling. Every time I opened it, hot air spilled down like a furnace had been running up there all day. Boxes from the previous owner were stacked everywhere, along with insulation that looked like it had been thrown around by raccoons. Claire kept saying we should clean it out eventually, but summer came fast and life got busy. Then her mom moved in. Her name was Diane, and even saying that now feels strange. For most of my marriage, she had been a polite distance in my life. Thanksgiving dinners, the occasional weekend visit, the kind of mother-in-law who always seemed composed, well-dressed, slightly intimidating in a quiet way. But that year, her divorce finalized. Claire's parents had been married for 35 years, and when it ended badly. Her dad moved to Arizona with a woman 20 years younger than him, and Diane suddenly had nowhere she wanted to be. So Claire did what Claire always did. She opened the door. "It'll just be for a few weeks," she told me one night while we were brushing our teeth, "until she figures things out." I remember shrugging. "That's fine." And I meant it. At first, it really was fine. Diane moved into the guest room with 2 suitcases and a calm smile that looked practiced. She thanked us too many times, cooked dinner a lot, cleaned things that didn't need cleaning. The first thing I noticed was how quiet she was. Claire and I had been together since college. Our life was loud. Music playing while we cooked, TV in the background, friends dropping by. Diane moved through the house like someone who didn't want to disturb the air. Sometimes I'd wake up early and find her already sitting on the back porch with a mug of coffee, staring out at the yard like she was waiting for something. It made me feel bad for her. Claire, on the other hand, went into full caretaker mode. Phone calls, paperwork, helping Diane talk to lawyers and realtors about selling the old house. The weird shift happened slowly, the way storms creep in during Midwest summers. You don't notice until the air feels heavy. The attic came back into the picture about 3 weeks after Diane arrived. One Saturday morning, Claire announced we were finally clearing it out. "It's driving me crazy knowing all that junk is up there," she said, tying her hair back. "Matt, you're the tall one. You're going up." Diane laughed softly from the kitchen table. I remember climbing the ladder and pushing open the hatch. Heat slammed into my face immediately. It smelled like dust and old wood. "Jesus," I called down. "It's like a sauna up here." Claire yelled back, "Just start handing stuff down." So that's what we did. For the next hour, I crawled around in that miserable attic, passing boxes through the opening while Claire stacked them in the hallway. About halfway through, Diane came over and looked up through the hatch. "You must be dying up there," she said. Her voice sounded closer than usual, almost echoing in the narrow hallway. "I've definitely made worse life choices," I joked. Claire had stepped outside to take a phone call. I could hear her voice faintly through the front door. Diane stayed there, looking up at me. The thing about that moment is nothing obvious happened. No dramatic music, no lightning bolt realization. But I remember noticing details I had never paid attention to before. The way her hair had streaks of silver that caught the light. The way she leaned one shoulder against the wall like she was trying not to get in the way. The way her eyes stayed on mine a little longer than normal conversation required. "Do you want some water?" she asked. That would actually save my life. She came back a minute later with a bottle and climbed 2 steps up the ladder to hand it to me. The hallway was quiet. Claire was still outside. When Diane looked up again, we were suddenly very close. The heat from the attic was pouring down around us, and I could feel sweat running down the side of my neck. "You weren't kidding about the heat," she said. "Feels like Florida up here." She smiled faintly. "You should take a break." I took the water and drank half the bottle. Probably a good idea. But neither of us moved right away. There was this strange pause, like both of us were aware of something but refusing to define it. Then Claire came back inside and everything snapped back to normal. The rest of the afternoon went exactly how you'd expect. Boxes, dust, complaining about the heat. By evening, we had the attic halfway cleared. That night, we ordered pizza and sat around the living room watching some reality show Claire liked. Diane laughed at the right moments, but she seemed different somehow. More relaxed, like something inside her had shifted. I told myself I was imagining it. A few days later, Claire had to travel to Chicago for work. Just 2 nights. Before she left, she hugged her mom in the kitchen. "You'll be okay here with Matt?" Diane smiled. Of course. I remember Claire kissing me quickly before heading out the door with her suitcase. The house felt strange after she left, quieter. That first evening, Diane made spaghetti. We ate at the kitchen table with the windows open because the air conditioning was struggling against the humidity. We talked about random things, movies, the neighborhood, her plans after selling the old house. Then the conversation drifted toward her divorce. She didn't cry or anything like that. She just talked calmly about it, like someone explaining a long illness. 35 years, she said, twirling pasta slowly on her fork. I didn't know what to say. I'm sorry, I finally said. She looked at me for a second. You're a good man, Matt. The way she said it made my chest tighten for some reason. Later that night, I was watching TV in the living room when she came downstairs wearing one of those loose cotton sleep shirts. Mind if I join you? She asked. Not at all. She sat on the other end of the couch. The show kept playing, but neither of us were really watching it. Outside, a thunderstorm had started rolling in. You could hear the rain hitting the roof. After a while, she said quietly, Do you ever feel like life changes all at once and you didn't see it coming? I shrugged. Sometimes. She looked toward the hallway ceiling. The attic's probably still miserable in this weather. Definitely. She nodded slowly. I kept thinking about how hot it was up there the other day. There was a long pause. Then she looked back at me. You know, she said softly, for a moment I forgot I was standing under the house where my daughter lives. My stomach twisted, because I knew exactly what she meant. And the worst part? I hadn't forgotten either. The next morning felt like the kind of morning where you pretend nothing happened, except something had happened.
Not physically, not technically, but the air between Diane and me had shifted into something I couldn't unfeel. I woke up early and lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, replaying that moment in the living room, the way she said it, the way she looked at me when she said it. For a second, I actually wondered if I imagined it. Then I heard her footsteps in the kitchen, slow, careful, the same quiet way she moved through the house since she arrived. I got up, threw on a t-shirt, and walked down the hallway. She was standing at the counter pouring coffee. Morning light came through the window above the sink, catching the edges of her hair. She turned when she heard me. Morning, she said. Her voice was completely normal. Too normal. Morning. There was a pause while I poured my own coffee. Neither of us mentioned the night before. We talked about the weather, the thunderstorm, whether Claire's flight probably landed yet. It felt like two actors reading safe lines from a script, but underneath it, there was something else humming quietly between us, something that made every second feel slightly too aware. Later that afternoon, Diane said she wanted to finish clearing the attic. Claire had texted earlier saying she'd be busy in meetings most of the day. I figured I'd do some work from home and maybe tackle the attic alone later. But Diane stood in the hallway looking up at the hatch. We left a lot up there, she said. Yeah. I could help? I hesitated. The memory of that heat, that weird moment on the ladder, came rushing back. You don't have to, I said. It's miserable up there. She smiled faintly. I've lived through worse. Before I could think too much about it, I pulled the ladder down again. The attic released another wave of thick, stale heat. Still Florida up there? She asked. Worse. I climbed up first, moving boxes toward the opening. Dust floated through the narrow beams of sunlight cutting through the vents. A minute later, I heard the ladder creak. Diane climbed halfway up, just enough to take the boxes from me. For a while, we worked like that, quietly. The attic smelled like old wood and insulation. Sweat soaked through the back of my shirt within 10 minutes. You weren't exaggerating, she said, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand. Feels like the house is breathing heat. She looked up into the attic. Can I come up? The question surprised me. It's not exactly safe, I said. Nails everywhere, low ceiling. I'll be careful. There was something about the way she said it that made me step aside. She climbed the rest of the ladder slowly and crouched down beside me. The space was smaller than it looked from below. The roof slanted low, forcing us to hunch forward. The air barely moved. Within seconds, the humidity wrapped around us like a blanket. Wow, she said softly. Told you? We both laughed a little. Then we went back to moving boxes. At some point, the ladder shifted slightly when she handed one down. She grabbed the wooden beam beside her to steady herself. Her hand brushed my arm. It was probably accidental, but neither of us pulled away right away. The heat made everything feel slower, thicker. You okay? I asked. Yeah. She looked at me then, and there was something different in her expression. Something tired. You know what the strangest part of divorce is? She said quietly. What? People suddenly treat you like you're fragile, like you're glass. I shrugged. maybe they're just trying to be nice. She shook her head. No, it's worse than that. She shifted slightly closer so she could reach another box. I spent 35 years being someone's wife, someone's routine, someone's certainty. She paused. And then one day, you're just a woman standing alone in a quiet house. The attic creaked softly above us as the wind moved outside. I didn't know what to say. She continued looking at the box in her hands. You know what else happens? What? He realized how long it's been since someone looked at you like you were still alive? That sentence landed heavier than anything she'd said before. I felt something uncomfortable move through my chest. Diane, I'm not saying you did anything wrong, she interrupted quickly. Her voice softened. I just noticed it the other day. The attic felt 10 degrees hotter. I noticed you noticed me. My brain told me this was the moment to shut everything down, change the subject, climb down the ladder, walk outside. Instead, I just sat there, because part of me knew she was right. I had noticed, not intentionally at first, but once the thought existed, it was impossible to ignore. She looked down at her hands. I shouldn't have said that. The silence stretched. You're going through a lot, I said finally. She gave a small, sad laugh. That's a polite way of saying I'm a mess. I didn't say that, but you thought it. She glanced at me again. Don't worry, I'm not going to ruin my daughter's marriage. The words hit me harder than they should have, because suddenly the idea existed in the room, something neither of us had named until that moment. I stood up too quickly and hit my head lightly on the beam above. Jesus. She laughed, genuine this time. Careful. I rubbed the back of my head. Maybe we should take a break. That's probably wise. But neither of us moved right away. The attic was silent except their odd breathing. Finally, she stood and brushed dust off her hands. You know what the worst part of getting older is? She said quietly. What? She looked directly at me now. You're still the same person inside. Same thoughts. Same feelings. Her voice lowered slightly. But the world decides you're invisible. My throat felt dry. You're not invisible. The moment the words left my mouth, I wished I could take them back, because they changed something. She studied my face like she was trying to decide whether I meant it. Thank you, she said softly. Then she climbed down the ladder first. I stayed in the attic a few seconds longer, staring at the wooden beams like they might offer some kind of explanation for what was happening. They didn't. When I finally came down, Diane was standing in the hallway fanning herself with an old magazine. Air conditioning feels amazing now, she said. Yeah. Her eyes met again, and for a split second, the memory of that cramped attic space hung between us like unfinished business. We finished the rest of the boxes in silence. That night, I tried to convince myself the tension would fade. Claire would come home tomorrow. Everything would go back to normal. But later, around midnight, I woke up thirsty and went to the kitchen. The house was dark except for a dim light over the sink. Diane was sitting at the table. She looked up when I walked in. Couldn't sleep, she asked. Not really. She gestured to the chair across from her. Me neither. I grabbed a glass of water and sat down. For a minute, neither of us spoke. Then she said something that changed everything. You know what I realized today? What? She leaned back slightly in the chair. That attic makes you forget things. I frowned. What do you mean? She looked straight at me. In that heat? In that quiet? Her voice dropped almost to a whisper. For a second today, I forgot you were my daughter's husband. My pulse jumped. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller. She held my gaze. And I think you forgot too.
Neither of us said anything after that, but the silence was no longer harmless. It was waiting. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a terrible thought began forming. Claire wouldn't be home for another day. I didn't sleep much after that conversation in the kitchen. I went back to bed around 1 a.m, but my brain kept replaying every second of it. The way she said it, the way she looked at me when she said it. For a moment today, I forgot you were my daughter's husband. It wasn't said like a joke. It wasn't an accident. It was a confession. And the worst part was the part she didn't say out loud, that I had forgotten too. Around 3 a.m, I finally drifted into that half sleep where you're still aware of the room around you. The air conditioner hummed softly. Rain from the earlier storm tapped against the windows. I woke again around 7. Sunlight came through the blinds in thin strips across the bed. Claire's side was still empty, the sheets barely disturbed since she left. For a second, I almost convinced myself the tension with Diane had been exaggerated in my head. Then I walked into the kitchen. She was already there, same as the morning before. Coffee, quiet movements, that calm composure she always carried. But something was different. She was wearing a loose gray tank top and cotton shorts. Nothing inappropriate, nothing you wouldn't wear around family. Except I noticed it now. That was the problem. Once your brain starts seeing someone differently, it doesn't go back. "Morning," she said. "Morning." I grabbed a mug and poured coffee. My hands felt slightly unsteady, which annoyed me. We stood at the counter in silence for a moment. Then she said it casually, like she was commenting on the weather. "I was thinking about the attic again." I let out a short breath. "Of course you were." She smiled slightly at that. "It's hard not to." I leaned against the counter. "We finished most of it yesterday. There's still a corner left." Of course there was. A long pause followed. "You don't have to help with it," I said. "I know. But you want to." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she took a slow sip of coffee and looked toward the hallway ceiling where the attic hatch sat closed. "Do you ever notice," she said quietly, "how certain places feel separate from the rest of the house?" "What do you mean?" "Like they belong to a different version of reality." I rubbed my eyes. "You mean like basements in horror movies?" She laughed softly. "Something like that." Then she set the mug down. "That attic feels like that." I knew exactly what she meant, because it had felt the same way to me since the moment we both ended up crouched there together in the heat. A space outside normal rules. "You're overthinking it," I said. She tilted her head slightly. "Am I?" The look she gave me lasted just a second too long. Then she finished her coffee and stood. "Well," she said, brushing her hands together lightly, "I'm going up there to finish that corner." I watched her walk toward the hallway. "You shouldn't go up alone," I called after her. She stopped at the ladder and looked back at me. There was a small smile on her face. "Then I guess you should come with me." That should have been the moment I stopped everything. I could have walked outside, gone for a drive, called Claire, done literally anything else. Instead, I followed her. The attic ladder creaked as I pulled it down. Hot air immediately rolled into the hallway again. Diane looked up at the opening. "That heat is unbelievable." "Yeah." She placed one foot on the ladder. "You first," I said. "No," she said calmly. "You're taller." So I climbed up first again. The attic felt even hotter than the day before. The storm had left the air thick and heavy. Within seconds, sweat was already forming along my neck. I moved a few remaining boxes toward the center. Then I heard the ladder shift. Diane climbed up slowly and crouched beside me. The attic was small enough that our shoulders nearly touched. For a while, we worked quietly, handing old books and dusty decorations toward the opening. Neither of us spoke, but the silence was different now. Not neutral, charged. At one point, Diane leaned forward to grab a box behind me. Her arm brushed across my back. She didn't pull away immediately. Neither did I. "You're sweating through your shirt," she said quietly. "It's about 100 degrees up here." She nodded. Her face was close now. I could see tiny lines near the corners of her eyes, the kind you only notice when someone is inches away. "You know what's strange?" she said. "What?" "This heat makes everything slow down." My pulse thudded in my ears. "Yeah." She looked toward the attic opening where bright light from the hallway spilled upward. Then she looked back at me. And quiet. For a moment, we just stared at each other. There's a point in certain moments where you realize something irreversible is about to happen. You feel it before it actually happens. Like standing at the edge of a cliff. My brain screamed that this was insane. This was my wife's mother. Claire trusted both of us completely. But the attic felt like its own sealed world. The heat, the isolation, the heavy air pressing against your skin. Diane exhaled slowly. "You should go downstairs," she said softly. The words sounded like advice, but she didn't move away. "You should too," I said. Another pause. Then she whispered something that erased the last bit of distance between us. "I don't think either of us wants to." I should have stood up. I should have climbed down the ladder. Instead, I stayed exactly where I was. Her hand rested lightly against the wooden beam beside my leg. "Matt," she said quietly. Just hearing my name in that tone made my stomach tighten. "Yes?" She searched my face like she was looking for permission to say the next thing. "This is a terrible idea." I nodded slowly. "Yeah." Neither of us moved. The attic creaked again as wind pushed against the roof. Diane's voice dropped to almost nothing. "Your wife trusts me." "I know." "She trusts you even more." "I know." Her eyes held mine. "But for the last 2 days," she whispered, "I haven't been able to stop thinking about this attic." The confession hung in the air between us. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. "You're not the only one," I admitted. That was the moment everything finally broke. Not with some dramatic move, not with sudden passion, just a quiet surrender to something we had both already stepped too far into. Diane closed her eyes briefly. Then she said something that still echoes in my head. "Just for a moment," she murmured. When she opened her eyes again, she was closer than before. So close I could feel the heat of her skin in the suffocating air. And suddenly the attic felt even smaller, like the entire house had shrunk down to that one hidden space above the ceiling. One moment. That's all it was supposed to be. But the moment we both leaned toward each other, I realized something terrifying.
We hadn't forgotten Claire, not even for a second, and somehow that made it worse. There's a moment right before you do something you know you can't undo. It's not dramatic, it's quiet. Your brain shows you every possible exit at the same time, every version of the next 10 years that could exist if you simply stand up and walk away, and somehow, you still don't move.
That was the moment, sitting in that attic. Diane's face inches from mine, the air thick and suffocating, the wooden beams pressing us into a space too small for two people pretending nothing was happening. "This is a terrible idea," she had said. She was right, and I still didn't move. When we finally kissed, the second it happened, everything shifted. Not just the situation, something inside me. Because the second our lips met, the reality of it crashed in. This was my wife's mother, the woman who had hugged Claire in this same house 3 days earlier, the woman who called her sweetheart, the woman Claire trusted enough to open her home to after a divorce that shattered her life. And somehow I was kissing her in a dusty attic like we were characters in the worst possible story. Diane pulled back first. Her breathing was uneven. "We can't," she said quickly. Her voice had changed. The calm composure was gone now. "I know." But neither of us moved away. The attic felt like it was closing in around us. For a second, we just stared at each other, both realizing we had crossed a line we had been pretending not to see. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "For what?" "For even letting this happen. You didn't make it happen alone." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said something that twisted the situation even tighter. "I think I knew the moment I climbed that ladder today." The honesty of it hit hard. "You planned it?" I asked. She shook her head immediately. "No, not like that." She wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. But I knew something was already happening between us. And instead of avoiding it, she glanced around the attic. I came back to the one place where it felt real. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then she looked at me again. "We stop now." It wasn't a question. I nodded. "Yeah." But the problem with crossing a line is that once you're on the other side, the ground behind you doesn't magically reset. It's still broken. We climbed down from the attic one after the other. The hallway air felt almost cold after the heat up there. For a second, it looked like everything might actually go back to normal. Diane brushed dust from her shorts and gave a small, uneasy laugh. "Well," she said, "that attic is officially finished." "Yeah." We stood there awkwardly, two people who had just detonated something invisible in the middle of the house. "I'm going to take a shower," she said finally. "Probably a good idea." She paused before walking down the hall. "Matt?" "Yeah?" Her voice softened again. "We really do stop now." I nodded. "I know." Then she went into the guest room and closed the door. I stood there in the hallway, staring up at the attic hatch. A few hours later, Claire called. She sounded cheerful and exhausted at the same time. "Meetings all day," she said. "But good news, I'm catching an earlier flight tomorrow morning." My stomach dropped. "Oh yeah?" "Yeah, I'll be home by noon." "Nice." I could hear airport noise in the background. "How's Mom doing?" she asked. The question felt like a punch to the ribs. "She's good," I said carefully. "We finished cleaning the attic, actually." "Finally," Claire laughed. "That thing was driving me crazy." I forced a chuckle. "Yeah, it's done." That night, the house felt different. Heavier. Diane and I barely spoke during dinner. Just normal surface conversation about Claire coming home tomorrow. But every once in a while, our eyes met. And every time they did, the memory of that attic rushed back instantly. Around 10, she stood up from the couch. "I'm going to bed early," she said. "Okay." She walked toward the hallway. Then she stopped, turned slightly. "Good night, Matt." "Good night." She disappeared into the guest room. I stayed up another hour pretending to watch TV. Eventually, I turned everything off and went to bed. Sleep didn't come easily. My brain kept replaying the attic moment again and again, like it was trying to understand how something so insane had actually happened. But the worst part wasn't the kiss. The worst part was realizing something I hadn't fully admitted to myself yet. It hadn't felt like a mistake in the moment. It had felt inevitable. The next morning, Claire came home. The sound of her suitcase wheels rolling across the porch felt surreal. Diane and I were both in the kitchen when the door opened.
"Hey," Claire called. She walked in smiling and immediately hugged her mom. "I missed you." "I missed you too," Diane said. Her voice was steady, perfectly normal. Then Claire turned and wrapped her arms around me. "You survived 2 days without me?" "Barely." She laughed and kissed me quickly. For a moment, I felt like the worst person on earth. Claire dropped her bag and looked around. "The house looks great." "We got a lot done," I said. Her eyes moved toward the hallway ceiling. "You cleaned the attic?" "Yep," Diane said calmly. "All finished." Claire smiled. "Thank God." She walked toward the hallway and looked up at the closed hatch. "You guys went up there together?" My chest tightened slightly. "Yeah," I said. "Mostly Matt doing the heavy lifting." Claire laughed and shook her head. "I bet it was 1,000,000 degrees up there." Diane and I exchanged the quickest glance. "Pretty close," she said. Claire stretched and yawned. "I'm taking a shower. Airport air is disgusting." She headed upstairs, humming softly. The second she disappeared, the silence between Diane and me returned. Neither of us spoke. After a few seconds, she quietly grabbed her coffee mug and walked out to the back porch. I stayed in the kitchen, staring at the hallway ceiling again. That attic hatch looked completely ordinary. Just a square piece of wood with a pull string. But I knew the truth about it now. Because somewhere above that ceiling, in that suffocating heat and silence, Diane and I had created something that didn't belong in this house. And no matter how normal everything looked now, we both knew exactly what had happened up there. And we both knew something even worse. The attic wasn't the problem. The problem was that we were still living under the same roof. And the memory of that moment wasn't going anywhere. Not for her. Not for me. Not ever.